Right, sports fans, how's everybody out there doing? William Martin coming at you one more time here on YouTube with another edition of the 300 Pounds of Sports Knowledge Podcast. It was 30 years ago when the original Cleveland Browns announced their intention to leave town, and their replacement is about to do the same thing. Now, whereas that the original Browns have enjoyed immense success as the Baltimore Ravens, which includes them winning a pair of Super Bowl championships, the new Browns are leaving Cleveland, but they're still going to be the Browns in more ways than one. So, Browns team owner Jimmy Haslam has been seeking funding for a new indoor stadium for his team. And Haslam is one step closer to that as Ohio Governor Mike DeWine approved the allocation of $600 million for a Browns new stadium project. And of course, much to the dismay of the folks in Cleveland, their Browns are leaving town, but it's only to the nearby suburb of Brook Park. And at the end of the day, plain and simple, another one bites the dust as another cold weather NFL team is bidding farewell to the elements in favor of an indoor stadium that will allow them to have year round events such as WrestleMania, concerts, and the NBA and the NCAA's Final Four. Honestly, it wouldn't also surprise me to see Jimmy Haslam attempt to pry the Big Ten championship game away from Indianapolis for his new home for the Browns. So you look at it, and at the end of the day, indoor stadiums in this era of the National Football League are what the cookie cutters were to the 1960s, 1970s, and 1980s because they are becoming a dime a dozen. Right now, you got the Detroit Lions, Minnesota Vikings, and Indianapolis Colts. They're all cold weather teams who currently play games indoors. And they've been that way for quite some time. The Colts have basically played indoors since they left Baltimore after the 1983 season. Overall, we're talking about 10 teams in the NFL that play their games indoors. And you might as well say an 11th in the Houston Texans, albeit that the Texans do have that retractable roof. But nonetheless, that number is only going to grow because the Browns, Chicago Bears, Washington Commanders, and Tennessee Titans are all set to take their parties indoors. So now we're basically talking about half of the league is going to have indoor venues. So you look at it, and it's the trend. It's all about the money because today's NFL owner, they're not really worried about their team having a home field advantage. What they're and winning because of that. What they're worried about is winning at the cash register because they want year round events at their billion-dollar palaces. And once this thing goes through for the Browns, the AFC East is going to be the only division in the NFL where at least one team doesn't have an indoor stadium. It's hard to believe because you look at it, and the AFC North is supposed to be a blood and guts division. Why? It's home to the Ravens, the Pittsburgh Steelers, and the Cincinnati Bengals, as well as the Browns. And you think about some of those cold weather AFC North battles in the months of November, December, and January. They're going to still take place, but just not in Cleveland. And it's hard to believe not seeing those physical cold weather games in Cleveland late in the year, or the snow, the rain, the wind, the elements. It's another part of the game that is leaving. And I'll ask you this because you look at the Minnesota Vikings. They went indoors, I believe it was 1982 to the Metrodome, and they had those couple of years where they played outside at the University of Minnesota Stadium between their time in the Metrodome and their time at US Bank Stadium. How much of a home field advantage have the Vikings really enjoyed since they played indoors? And what about the Lions as well? Now, I'm not here saying that just because you play indoors in bad weather or play outdoors rather in bad weather that you're guaranteed to have a home field advantage because you still have to field a team that can go out there and win. Of course, if you're the Cleveland Browns, they have not won for quite some time, but that just has more to do to the fact that they have themselves an inept organization. But nonetheless, if you have a team and they play in cold weather, they play in warm weather, this, that, and the third, use that to your advantage. When you go indoors for your home games, it kind of makes it more like a neutral site game. You look at, I think back to the Buffalo Bills, when they had the experiment for several years when they played a couple of games up in Toronto at the Rogers Center as opposed to Ralph Wilson Stadium. It's one of those where most of those games they lost because the Bills, they didn't have that home field advantage. Nobody wants to go to Western New York in late November, December, and early January to play a game. Very tough. I'm not saying that the Bills, can't lose there because they've shown that, but nonetheless, it's still tough to deal with. You think about teams having to go to Green Bay late in the year, and here's a kicker for you, because the NFC North, which of course once upon a time was the NFC Central, it used to be the black and blue division. You can't say that anymore because the Vikings are indoors, the Lions are indoors, and of course the Bears are about to join them. Okay, so for me, you look at most MLB franchises, they play outdoors. And I know it's a little bit different because baseball played in the spring, the summer, and the fall. But nonetheless, those organizations still go out there and they find a way to have outdoor events, or events throughout the year that are going to make money for their stadiums. Why can't some of these NFL teams simply go out there and do the same thing? I'm just saying. But nonetheless, this to me is another slap in the face to the hardcore Browns fans who take pride in their team. They take pride in being out there in the cold in all elements, whether it was at the old Cleveland Municipal Stadium or the current Huntington Bank Field. At the end of the day, it's tough to be a Browns fan in more ways than one. We remember what Art Modell did when he decided to leave town after the 95 season. The Browns didn't have a football team for 4 years, and the Browns have not been right ever since. And of course, like I said, the original Browns, the Baltimore Ravens, have gone on to have immense success. And of course, if you're Jimmy Haslam, he's a wealthy man. He's a billionaire. He's going to get what he wants, and he's doing it once again. He found a way around the Art Modell law that was put in place to prevent the Browns from moving and saying, basically saying, hey, we're keeping them in the state. And because of that, he's going to get his deal, and his Browns are going to be moving to the suburbs. And unfortunately, it's what wealthy people do. They throw their weight around, or in this case, they throw their wallet around. And at the end of the day, they're going to get what they want. And in an era where more teams around sports are opting for downtown venues as their home arenas or home stadiums, the Browns instead are opting for the suburbs. So you ask yourself, will this new stadium or new indoor facility lead to more success for the Cleveland Browns? I'm not banking on it because it's still the Cleveland Browns. This organization doesn't know what they're doing, and guess what? You just made it better and easier for the Cincinnati Bengals, for the Pittsburgh Steelers, and for the Baltimore Ravens to come into town and get a W. Why? Because since returning to the NFL in 1999, and since the AFC North was formed in 2002, the Cleveland Browns are the only team in that division to not win the division title. So that just gives you an idea of how inept that this organization was. This was not about the Browns. This was the fact that Jimmy Haslam has himself a shiny toy, and he's going to use that shiny toy in the Browns as leverage to get what he wants. Jimmy Haslam, excuse me, has not made the Browns any closer to being a winner. Okay, they are still a terrible team. They're still a terrible organization, and like I always say, it always starts at the top. This is an unfortunate situation for football fans, hardcore football fans in Cleveland. Can they still see their Browns in Brook Park? Absolutely. But it ain't going to be the same. This is like watching, your best friend who you grew up with, move to another side of town or, move to the suburbs. And you basically, your parents and their parents are saying, well, you guys can still hang out. It ain't the same when you guys grew up on the same block. Okay, and this is basically what the Browns are doing to their fans. So at the end of the day, what's next for one of the NFL's oldest franchises? Well, sort of. Once you factor in, that gap that they had in the late '90s of not being existent and then coming back, of course, in a different form. I'm not holding out breath. I'm not holding out hope for it. At the end of the day, it's the Browns. It's their organization, and at the end of the day, they simply just find ways to screw up. But I think the more troubling thing for me, in my opinion, and call me old school, call me a purist, whatever. Football in January, football in December, it's supposed to be played in the elements, not on some fast indoor track. And, I think back to last January when the Eagles beat the Rams in the divisional round in the snow, and all you heard was from some people complaining, "Oh, this game should have been postponed. Oh, this game should have been played indoors, so it could have been equal for the Rams." That's what a home field advantage is all about. Okay, and honestly, when the Eagles did play the Rams indoors the last season, it was advantage Eagles because on that fast track, guess what? The Rams could not slow down the dynamic Saquon Barkley. So at the end of the day, you play to the elements, you build a team around your elements. It's just like in baseball. All of these fields are different. No, like the dimensions from one ballpark in Major League Baseball, it's not the same as another one. And teams should, and most or some teams at least, do try to use that to their advantage, and they build a team around that. I always think back to the Bill Parcells days when he was the head coach of the New York Giants. He always used the wind at the Meadowlands to his advantage. But at the end of the day, everybody wants something for nothing. The game has changed, and it's sad because they're taking the elements out of it. But basically, by the end of this decade, we're going to have half of the teams in the NFL playing indoors. It's not the same game, and honestly, it's only going to get worse because more and more teams are going to opt for the indoor stadiums until basically the NFL is not going to be anything different than the NBA or the NHL. And of course, they play indoors for different reasons, but nonetheless the Browns are going indoors, and it stinks. And it stinks worse than what the Browns usually do on Sunday afternoons. But nonetheless, it stinks nonetheless. It's a bad day for Cleveland Browns fans. That's all I could say. And I'm simply going to leave it there. But, folks, that is going to wrap it up. And as always, I want to take this time out to thank each and every one of you for checking out the 300 Pounds of Sports Knowledge podcast here on YouTube. And as always, if you like what you heard and saw on this podcast, you know what to do. Please feel free to hit that like button as well as subscribing to this channel. Like I always say, it's greatly appreciated. Also, if you are on the X, formerly known as Twitter, please feel free to follow me at 300 Pounds of Sports. And like I always say, if you follow me, it will be my pleasure to follow you right back. That also goes for Instagram, where you can check me out at 300 Pounds of Sports Knowledge. And if you give me that follow, I'll give you that follow right back. Also, you can check us out on Facebook at the Sports Depot 365. And as far as I'm concerned, one of the better sports groups going on social media. But until next time, fine folks, my name is William Martin. I'm signing off, and I'm saying thanks once again for tuning into the 300 Pounds of Sports Knowledge podcast here on YouTube. Be well, everybody.